discipline speed of okay with the stream.
It's saying this meeting is being live streamed. Can I like dull the screen? Sorry, I just want to like. Yeah. Hello.
You have to go straight out. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
I just wanted to check something. Nice sound. Hi, Harry. The general trend in midterm elections is that the sitting party will lose votes. The Democrats are put in this like miraculous position this year where the polls are showing that that might not be true in this instance. We might be able to maintain control over the Senate, the House, and the presidency, which obviously isn't up for election. Anyway, the important thing to note here is that there's still things that Biden wants to get passed that he will be unable to do if you get more people elected into the Senate and House that will not be on board with the Democratic agenda. What we're going to tell you is in these particularly close races, it is incredibly dangerous to empower a party that is likely to suction off votes from you, that is likely to do things anti-democratic once they're in power. You're far more likely to get votes when you energize the base and give name recognition to your own candidate that you're trying to win general elections. 3 points in the speech today. Firstly, why investing in your own candidate will help you win general elections. Secondly, why far-right candidates are far more electable when they get more turnout at the point where they are winners of the primary. The final thing is to say why, even if a centrist wins in these races, we think that is far better in terms of bipartisanship. In terms of setup, obviously, we would use every single dollar of funding that is currently being set on these far-right candidates and spend it all on the Democratic candidate that we think is most likely to win the race. In terms of context, I think the first thing to note is that obviously Democrats are doing significantly better than projected. The Dobbs decision means that women are likely to turn out in massive numbers in order to support the Democrats and make sure that their rights are upheld. But I think the really special thing for us is that even libertarian states like Alaska that tend to go Republican are now coming out in support of people's freedoms and liberties. All of that means that there is ripe for the taking to get Democrats in power. So I think there are Democratic voters available that we ought to be capitalizing on. Why is investing in your own candidate likely to win you the general election? I'm going to give you a few reasons why this is mutually exclusive material. The first thing to say is that when you run a candidate in primaries and throw all of your support behind them, you get early airtime for these candidates. You get them more screen time. You get them more billboards in states. You get them more slots in TVs. Even if people aren't enrolled to vote in Democratic primary elections, they still engage with media on the day-to-day. They still see town halls happening in their area. That candidate that gets all of the Democratic support is more likely to have a better lead up into the general election when they see that people are aware of who they are. That is incredibly important, specifically in the context of 24-hour news cycles, where news is constantly shoving, like Trump is like drowning out media with crazy things he says. You need to get as much name recognition as you can for the candidate that you are trying to back to win, which really ought to be a fucking Democrat, right? But the second thing to say is that it is just like physically mutually exclusive to the point where there are spending caps in these states as a result of literal constitutional requirements, which means there is a zero sum in terms of how much money that is available to be spent. But the final thing to say is that you do probably disenfranchise left-wing voters when you funnel money towards like right-wing candidates. I think the first thing to know is just that often reporting and disclosure laws means that you can track where Democratic Party spending is going. It is really easy for right-wing candidates to say your own fucking party is like spending money on Trump candidates. I think you require turnout everywhere in order to win swing elections, right? It is not enough to try and get all of your vote mobilized. You have to get Democrats mobilized. You have to get swing voters mobilized, and you want to try and take voters from Republicans on side. If you lose your existing base, it becomes impossible to win these swing elections, which turn often on a percentage in specific districts. We make it far more likely that left-wing voters are not disenfranchised. The final thing this can explain is like why you get disenfranchised, right? These right-wing voters tell you that you ought not to have democratic rights, that you win elections based on fraud. It is very difficult to tell a woman whose rights in abortion is being taken away from her that your party, rather than defending her rights, is spending money on a candidate that is saying that like all lives matter, that you shouldn't abort fetuses, all those kinds of things. You likely turn important voters away. You lose any chance of winning the general election. Secondly, why are far-right candidates electable with turnout? I think the first thing to say is that obviously Trump still has significant sway in the United States in the way that politics runs. I think that means that when a far-right candidate wins the primary over a centrist, they have a significantly more likely chance of winning the general election in that state. Why is that the case? The first thing to say is just that, like, the centrist wing of the Republican Party has been systematically hollowed out by years of Trump's influence over the party. It means people like Mitt Romney are too cowardly to stand up for the things that centrists believe in. That means Trump and Trump candidates have an outsized say. So the second thing to say is that Trump just tells you not to fucking vote for centrist Republican candidates, right? He says that these people are fraud, that they're doing anti-democratic things. That immediately makes them less likely to win. But the final thing to say is just that when you have a Trump candidate in running in the general election, they're far more likely to say the kinds of outrageous things that media organizations pick up on. That 24-hour news cycle stuff I was telling you was important because they always get the most clicks. They're always top of the headlines. That means your normal Democratic candidate is always on the back foot. Finally, in terms of why we think centrists are important, right? Because it likely is the case that in some of these states, you probably will just lose elections because that is the nature of how democracy works. And the nature of gerrymandering in the United States means that Republicans will almost always have a dominant foot in these races. Why is it the case that we prefer the Democrats to not help a fucking far-right candidate be selected? I think the first thing to say is that Biden is a unique presidential president in the sense that he comes from the old days back when bipartisanship was something that mattered and people crossed the party floor in order to get outcomes that mattered. The impact of that is if you get centrists on board that care about what the Republican Party used to mean, you might pass the kinds of policies that you want by making strategic deals with the kinds of Republican candidates that might care about your mission. All of that means that policy outcomes are better. The second thing to note is you likely don't get the kinds of people within your own Senate that are saying that half the people that they're working alongside were voted in fraudulent manners. That means democracy itself is protected far more. We're doing things like looking at how congressional districts are drawn. It is far better to have normal people who are sane in government than elect far-right candidates.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now, as well, the first negative speaker has indicated the negative bench. Here. Ready?
This electorate isn't rural Alabama. This is a swing state in somewhere like New Hampshire, somewhere like an urban center of Texas, where people tend to be moderates and they don't tend to buy it. Importantly, when you put someone who's far right, who runs offensive messaging and puts forward policies that, because they're far right, the public doesn't buy into, it's extremely unlikely that you'll ever be successful at winning in that seat, especially when they're up against a moderate Democrat. That is the reason we win this debate, because we think this is a decisive time in politics where the Democrats must win. Firstly, some setup. Secondly, why we're going to win. It's important to note what this strategy will look like because they didn't actually step that through. The first thing to note is the Democrats are have a strong institution and a strong effective base that allows them to poll and determine where far right leaders will do badly and do well. I think it's very likely that the way in which this strategy plays out is they'll identify areas where far right candidates will be particularly unpopular. So they'll find those swing seats where it's very unlikely a far right candidate will ever win. Maybe because there is a large African-American voter base, or maybe because there's a strong Christian base or something like that that doesn't like decisive politics in the same way. I think what that means is it's likely the Democrats will be able to pin their strategy in an extremely effective way because they have the institutional resources and know-how and how they actually deliver that messaging. Secondly, I think they're just able to make a political judgment about where they select and where they choose to run this candidate. But thirdly, I think they're able to, I think thirdly as well, they're able to hide behind things like super PACs. They're able to use the money to do it in a very decentralized way because the Democratic Party is quite decentralized. But even if they're found out, I think firstly, Republicans will want to hide it because they think it's going to help them. But secondly, I think this will probably be seen as a clever strategy. Democrats and moderates will probably think, oh, this is a cool thing that they're doing. And Republicans have done similar things in the past with supporting Bernie and that sort of thing. So I don't think there's going to be a massive backlash from like Democratic voters or moderates. Finally, note that like this occurs in a swing state where most people tend to buy into moderate policies. By definition, a far-right candidate is far-right. They have far-right policies that don't create general buy-in. Their policies are unpopular with general members of the public, and they're only popular with the core of the Republican base. On funding, I think the first thing to note is that Democrats are already extensively funded, especially in swing states. They attract millions and millions and millions of dollars because, as Umbar said, the base is radicalized. They want to step forward and they want to prevent Republicans winning. I think this is especially true when they're running against far-right candidates. It's more likely they get donations on our side of the house if a far-right candidate is against a moderate candidate because they're seen as more of an existential threat. I think that mobilizes and energizes them. But secondly, note that we have an incumbent strategy. We're the incumbent as well, so we probably have more money, more resources because they're trying to run against us. Finally, I'll note that the Democrats must win in the short term because this is a decisive time in politics. The Republicans, as Umbar said, pose a great threat in terms of elections and that sort of thing. So we need to make sure we control the Senate. Their main reason that this far-right candidate could win was that America's a 24-hour news cycle, so therefore this will appeal to voters. I'll go on to our reasons why it's not true, but I'll just quickly respond to this. Firstly, I think Americans in general are exhausted with the Trumpian era of politics. They're tired of the 24-hour news cycle. Nobody wants Trump to come back and be on Twitter day after day after day after day. I think most voters would reject a far-right candidate who's extremely decisive and pushing those sort of narratives that are extremely harmful. But also note that like Democrats have also adapted to 24-hour news cycle. Like Joe Biden was effectively able to mobilize the base. Like it's not the same as before. I think they're able to counter that strategy to a quite good degree. I don't know why specifically a far-right candidate can occupy 24-hour news cycle. I think we can do it as well. We can get attention. We can say things that excite the base, and we can respond to their allegations, and that also gets you on the news as well. Okay, why is it that it's unlikely to be successful? Importantly, what a right-wing candidate looks like is one who says disgusting and offensive things quite often, that someone like Trump who says extremely controversial things, but second, with their far-right policies, which are off-putting to ordinary voters, especially voters in swing states. Why is it that, and they also, why is this not going to be successful, firstly, with Republicans and moderates? Firstly, I think like they buy into things like intense conspiracy theories, which most like Democrats and most people and most like voters just don't buy into because they've been disproven and they're false. Like the vast majority of people don't buy into like the Pizzagate and that sort of thing, and they reject it and they seem absurd. Secondly, though, I think these people want to limit freedoms, things like voting rights, which are hugely unpopular with Americans because they buy into a norm that things like voting rights and that sort of thing are really important. I think these moderates are ordinary people who are generally like neutral on like centrist policies, but don't like to see that extreme come through. I think they're very likely in these swing states to reject this far-right candidate, especially when the comparative is a moderate and centrist Democrat who's likely to be running against them. But also note that like most people tend to be like anti-racist and they don't like this like extremely like coarse language and that sort of thing. Secondly, though, I think this mobilizes Democrats, it energizes their base, so it means you're far more likely to get a high level of turnout and a huge number of people show up to vote for the Democrat. So even if they get more voters on their side of the house to vote for Republicans, I think this is far outweighed when you really piss off Democratic voters when they start to show up when they're really done. Also note that like doing things like gutting Medicare and stuff means you're able to, like, which far-right voters often want to do, means you're able to appeal to like old people and stuff who already vote for who tend to vote for right-wing parties, but now we're going to switch to Democrats. Also note, like, this prevents a shift for ethnic minorities to the Republican Party, because a trend within the US politics has been minorities shifting to the Republican Party, like Latino voters. I think it's far less likely when you have someone who's far right and racist and runs those sort of things that Latino voters who are core swing voters are going to vote for this candidate, are going to deliver on that. Finally, I think it forces moderate Republicans who are running against this far right Republican, the primary to the right, because they have to do things like say they support strong abortion rights and taxes because they're competing against the other Republican candidate. So I think it's likely that even if a moderate Republican wins the election, they've compromised on a number of things, which means that they're less likely to succeed against the Democrat who runs against them. At the end of this debate, I don't understand why moderates will like this far-right voter. I think it's really important to note that this is a swing state. I think you put off a huge number of people. That's why the Democrats will win.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now welcome the second Australian speaker to the UK to the upbench.
There are two ways we can win this debate. Firstly, we can show you why this is going to cause a far-right candidate to get in, and that will obviously have irreparable harms for everybody within the country of America, not our country, maybe our country. But secondly, we can show you that it's actually okay to have a centrist, and by alienating them, you also do irreparable harms in the state of democracy. So firstly, on whether or not this is going to get far-right candidates in. First thing I want to deal with before I get into sub-points is what Joe says about how the Democratic Party has lots of info, so they'll just be like really smart and just, you know, do this perfectly. Obviously, Democrats are prone to making errors based on false beliefs they have about voters, that they can't exactly understand everything perfectly. Okay, I think there are three distinct things to talk about in this speech. Firstly, about Democratic candidates and how you support them. Secondly, about far-right candidates, in this point. Secondly, about far-right candidates. And thirdly, about disenfranchising left-wing voters. Firstly, on your Democratic candidates. What we tell you is that you can firstly uniquely manipulate, like make the most of a 24-hour news cycle. What we hear from Joe is just that, oh, you know, we've learned to deal with the 24-hour news cycle. The far right can't occupy all of the time. The problem is, they do because they use crazy content and they escalate things. And so if you are supporting a far-right candidate, that probably means that the Democratic candidate also has to be more extreme. And that means you're probably more likely to alienate all of the centrist voters who need to attract within this centrist state by their characterization. And I think that means because you're trying to cater to the 24-hour news cycle and you've put forward a more extreme opponent, you're more likely to alienate people. But secondly, we tell you that there are constitutional spending caps, which mean this is obviously going to be a zero-sum game. And that's why stuff about mobilizing support, getting more funding, can't have a clear impact because clearly there's an absolute limit to how much you can spend where. We think that it's actually really bad to turn democracy into a parody when it degrades the quality of your own candidates and makes other candidates seem more normal. Secondly, talking now about far-right candidates. An important piece of context is that the Democratic Party wouldn't waste their money on the most crazy nutjob conspiracy theorists. Obviously, they want to choose a far-right candidate who's going to win the primary. So they choose one with an established reputation. They choose one who isn't super crazy, is probably just somebody who supports Trump and is anti-abortion, is slightly racist. So I think that means you can cut out a lot of the stuff they say about how, oh, you know, they're not going to buy into these like crazy ideas. But let's specifically respond to what we get from Joe. Joe says moderates don't buy into this stuff. Firstly, I've dealt with why conspiracy theories are unlikely to happen, but I'd also like to cast doubt on whether or not ordinary centrists can even notice that things are conspiracy theories. In this age of disinformation, like your ordinary, average, middle-aged white man in America is really confused about what's true or not because they're not like particularly literate in media and they have difficulty navigating circumstances. So it's not even necessarily true that they know what is real or not. I've told you about why the media landscape shifting means they're more likely to be confused. But secondly, I think just like moderate is a fake term. These people vote on ideas that appeal to them. And I think that even though we might understand the racist implications of a tough on crime policy or the sexist roots of anti-abortion, those are things that appeal to their faith and to their understanding of economics. So that means that even though you think these people are reasonable and moderate because they couch their racism in nice ways, because they seem to be friendly to the Black people on their street, they can still vote in racist ways. And those sensible far-right candidates can target their policies to them in ways that seem palatable. So when Trump candidates talk about low tax, they talk about anti-abortion, obviously those things do appeal to centrists, and people will vote for these sensible Trumpian candidates who they've recognized from Trump's glory days. That's really bad. Finally, talking about disenfranchising left-wing voters. The response we hear from Joe is that obviously the Democratic Party can just hide how they're spending all their money. That's pretty shit. Also note that the Liberals in the world tend to tear one another apart because they think it's their duty to hold up really high moral standards. So that means you get investigative journalism from the Atlantic being like, this is where all the money the Democratic Party is spending go. Look at what like terrible people they are. Look at how they're contributing to the downfall of democracy. I think this is really bad because it gives you a context, or if you just stay the course, you're likely to win. Democrats are pretty mobilized as it is. But what happens when you like actively do something that turns these people off? It means they don't vote for you. And why are they going to be so turned off? It's because of the inherent moral identity that has been around for a long time with Democrats who believe they're like, better than Republicans, but also has been forged in response to Trumpian politics. Trumpian politics has made the Democratic voters feel that they are the superior people. They are the people that support voter enfranchisement. They support honest, transparent politics. Honestly, doing this is going to alienate all the people you need to get you across the line in these primaries. That's really bad. Umbar talks about why you don't want a far right candidate in. That's exactly what the negative team gets. Secondly, though, talking about how centrists are really good at if they get in, it's best to build bipartisanship with them rather than completely alienate them. This is a unique way for us to win the debate because even if you don't buy that far right candidates are going to get in, we think that maybe losing the centrist isn't that bad because it can help in the long term. What do we say here? Firstly, not using dirty tactics means you're not going to normalize the denigration of democracy. That's already happened under Trumpian politics, but if Democrats don't also partake in it, that limits the urgency of centrist Republicans to resort to those tactics as well. We think that's really good. But secondly, note that these are incumbent Republicans. They are probably the Republicans that were anti-Trump. They already have reason to support Biden's policies. When you alienate them by actively supporting candidates running against them, saying that you're not willing to act with somebody who clearly could find common ground with you, that irreparably breaks down your relationship with these people. They are never going to be able to find common ground, cross the aisle to vote for policies you want. Instead, they actually completely go against you. You worsen partisanship, and that's really bad if the Democrats actually need to pass policy in the next few years. We've got two ways to win this debate. I think both still stand.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now to conclude the substantive portion of the debate. Welcome second negative speaker. Here.
Yeah, true. I can't say you.
All right, so we want implement. Let's be very clear. These moderate Republican candidates that you're up against in these states are not good for democracy. They still appoint Supreme Court justices who are probably going to be quite Republican and do again and further what they already did with overturning Roe and Wade. And they still vote for bad policies, right? And they can also still undermine democratic policies to be that one person that stands in the way to make it significantly less effective. We would much rather have a democratic candidate win in this state. I think that's quite obvious. In this debate, what I'm going to show you is one, why are these far right candidates going to be nasty and stupid? Two, why is it that we are going to convince liberals to be more energized and contribute more to you winning in these states? Thirdly, why is it that we convince Republicans to vote for you? And finally, why is it even if we don't get this far right person to win the primary, we still win? So on this context, what we tell you is that Democrats are quite strategic, and there was no response to this. So what you then have to buy in this debate is that it is true that the Democrats are probably going to pick a person that most suits their purposes, which we tell you is someone who is quite nasty, quite far right. But even if you don't believe that, right, we tell you that by definition of what a far right person is, it is somebody who is
very racist, buys into conspiracy theories like QAnon, is not just some average Republican. And what I also want to note here is that in the comparative, that moderate Republican is very likely to be a Trump supporter, right? Like there was one Republican moderate guy, Mitt Romney, was that him? Who didn't vote, like who didn't like Trump and like said one word against him and was like attacked. That they do support Trump. That's good. Okay, so that means these people are likely to be quite like stupid and also like they make bad decisions, right? Because if you buy into Trump and you buy into really bad conspiracy theories, you're likely to make stupid mistakes and contradict yourself like Marjorie Taylor Greene does. And that gives Democrats an opportunity to contradict them and say, that's so stupid. And then everyone goes, yeah. Okay, so why do you convince liberals? Let's break this down. There are groups of liberals. I tell you, there are hard liberals who at the moment are quite disenfranchised, right? Because at the moment, if you've got a contest in like a state between a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat, there's really no difference. There's very little incentive for you to vote. What we do is we flip those voters by giving them the perception that if they don't vote for a Democrat, they are going to get a far right candidate who is fundamentally against their ideals. That brings in a huge group of voters who previously wouldn't have voted at all. That's really important. Secondly, we get a group of middle voters who are probably going to vote for Democrats in either world. But what do? We increase the activity. Grace tells you that donations aren't that important, but it's not just about donations that go straight to advertising, right? It's about grassroots efforts. How many people can you get incentivized to go out on the street, to go door knocking, to talk to people, to convince people this is something that's good? We tell you the more that you get, that's really good in this debate. And that's actually probably significantly more important than just normalizing and getting name recognition. Because if you can convince people to talk to you, you can get people into conversations like old people that are bored at home and now someone comes to talk to them and they're like, oh, I'll engage in a conversation with you. You can actually get them to engage in the policies and buy into why Democrats are right. So that's actually probably significantly more important in this debate. What do the negating team tell you about, the affirmative team tell you about these liberals? Two things. Firstly, they tell you that Democrats actually become more extreme in opposition and that undermines this liberal capture. No, it doesn't, right? Okay, because it's quite unstrategic for a Democrat to just go really hard left in these moderate states. That would undermine everything we are saying, so we don't think they would. But what we tell you that practically looks like is Democrats can piggyback off the extreme attention that far-right voters get. For example, the White House account recently has been popping off and has been attacking Marjorie Taylor Greene for contradicting herself in her policies. People love that. That gets attention because it piggybacks off the attention that the far-right people get making their outlandish claims. That's how you piggyback off it. You don't actually have to become ridiculous and extreme yourself. Second claim that the affirmative team makes is that you will probably get found out. I think Joe has sufficiently responded to it to make it quite unlikely, but I think that basically Democrats are smart, even if they have principles. They want to win and get abortion rights more than they want to have principles, right? And they're Americans, so we think that they probably will. Like they care about this stuff. That means that Democrats likely will try and be smart and not like out Democrats for this. And again, Republicans aren't going to be the ones pushing this. Even if there is like an article that comes out about it, it's probably just not the most interesting thing in the election. The more interesting stuff is like the contentious claims that this far right person is actually making. That's where the attention is. We tell you it probably doesn't matter. And getting those other voters is more important. Okay, who do we swing then in this debate? Swing speakers and moderate Republicans. So swing speakers and moderate Republicans, as Joe told you, have got these same incentives, right? Grace tells you that they actually care about abortion, so they're never going to vote for a Democrat. No, the perception now is that the far right does not uniquely get anti-abortion claims because in the mind of the public, right, the Supreme Court has already said Roe and Wade doesn't exist. That means abortion's not the same level of priority for these people. Second thing we hear from Grace is that basically these people are somewhat more likely to buy into conspiracies. Look, yes, they are more likely to buy into conspiracies, but I think in these areas where previously the Republican candidates that have won have not been those ones that are talking about conspiracies, they are those ones that support some level of pension, some level of Medicare. When you threaten to take that away, that is not something that you support, particularly given all the narratives that you're now going to be hearing increasingly and increasingly about how far right and how extreme the Republican Party has become. I think that convinces swing voters to vote for us, but also no response to the material that Joe told you about how minority Republicans in particular are really put off by racism. And this is huge in this debate because that's actually a massive group that exists in these swing states, right? Massive, like, what I was going to say underholes, but not underholes, massive groupings of minorities who tend to vote together and who I think have been interested in the Republican story that they can convey of how you can take charge of your own fate. But that's really undermined when someone is just really explicitly supporting Proud Boys or explicitly won't say that it's bad. And they're just like actively extremely racist. I think that extremely is an instant turn off and you would much rather vote for a moderate Democratic candidate. Final point, even if the far right doesn't win the primary, it changes the perception because all those narratives that we're talking about, how extreme far right voters get, how the extreme far right candidate gets some more airtime, time, I think makes those Liberals think that this is more of a threat and makes them get more active regardless. I think it makes those moderate Republicans think this is more of a threat and makes them more active and more likely to vote moderate Republican regardless. So I think we win in either world. I think we win this debate.
Thank you very much for that speech. That concludes the third portion of the debate. We now move to the five section where the speaking order is reversed and speaking times halved. I'd like to invite the negative leader to deliver the negative leader reply.
Sorry, my phone. I'll start my speech with some extraneous context, and then I'll talk about who's likely to win the election. It's important to note, firstly, that we told you the Democrats are able to implement an effective strategy. They're able to choose the tailor-made Green as the crazy person they run against them, which means that like they know it won't run well with moderates and basic Republicans. But also the Democratic Party has an institution behind it that's able to run effective polling to choose who they pick in terms of how that strategy is implemented. We told you that moderate Republicans themselves are dangerous because they're still going to appoint Supreme Court nominations. They're still going to restrict Republican votes. They're still going to say the election was stolen. So it's extremely harmful to have them succeed, which is far more likely to happen on their side of the house. They never showed why Democrats would still win on their side of the house. Importantly, though, I don't think this affects the Democratic Party. We told you that you're still able to get more funding because obviously there are no election caps in America. You can use things like super PACs, as I said in mine, to funnel money in different ways, and you can do donations, but more broadly, you're able to do grassroots turnouts and that sort of thing. Finally, even if you accept that far-right people who are elected on our side of the house, I don't think that shifts the outcomes of elections or decisions in America very much because they're still not going to be the median vote in Congress and that sort of thing. They've never explained how this actually changes the outcomes of actual policy. We need more from them about why far-right is particularly harmful if you accept their best-case scenario. What does this look like? We told you that far-right candidates look like a few things. Firstly, they're extreme policy to the average voter. That's doing things like gutting, like financial compensation for being elderly or being sick. It looks like being offensive and nasty. So being a brute like Trump, or even more extreme like Melite Green, and buying into extreme conspiracy theories that most Americans reject. They're also just stupid people, right? Because they buy these conspiracy theories. They're idiots, they're brutes, they're nasty. And finally, they were chosen by the Democrats for that very reason. How do we, they said they can tailor the messaging, but again, that like implicitly responds to everything they said there. But we're able to run attack ads calling out what all those extreme policies, all the things they said, which put people off. But they said the 24-hour news cycle works in their favor. But we told you the Dems are able to respond to that through like dark branded and that sort of shit. And also, everyone's just sick of it. Everyone's tired of the 24-hour news cycle. Nobody wants to hear it. These far-right candidates don't run very well anymore. It's not 2016. How does this affect swing voters? The important piece of context is this is a swing state. These are normal, ordinary Americans who buy into normal policy demands. They want to protect their social security. They support abortion rights. They're the median type of voter who are these swing states. What that means is the reaction is it's extremely off-putting in a number of ways. Firstly, I think minorities are massively pushed off, and Georgia and I explained why they're a core voter base, and you don't want someone running racist policies. But secondly, I think their policy is called out. People recognize how dangerous it is for them. And also we told you, like someone like Taylor Greene running conspiracy theories, being able to call them an idiot all the time is extremely powerful with voters because they often just buy into narratives that now you're able to say this person is extreme. That's the narrative that voters do. I think most swing voters don't like that sort of narrative. They're likely to be put off by it. I think even if they get moderate vote Republicans, as they said, it's still more likely that Democrats are going to win the House because moderate voters made concessions that didn't get a response. So it means, again, even if this far-right person isn't like selected, we are still winning more elections because they've made those concessions that I told you about. At the end of this debate, why not put Melite Green up? We should try and win this election. Like, she's crazy, right? Like, that's the sort of people they're supporting.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now conclude the affirmative team's case, this debate, and indeed the speeches of opposite stuff 2022. We invite the affirmative reply.
Liberals in California and New Zealand love liberal clapbacks on the White House account, right? But this is about swing states. I think the far right doesn't vote for things like voter reform, for abortion, for healthcare. That's why we need to keep them out of politics. 3 questions. Are you likely to win if you stay the course? Why you absolutely lose with the far right candidate in the primary, but why, and finally, at our worst, why centrist winning is still good. Are you likely to win if you stay the course? Look back to the context I give you at first that goes unresponded to, right? There are conditions on the ground for Dems to collect votes and to beat candidates if they run a principal campaign and spend all of their money helping their candidate. They both get the moderates who like their abortion and healthcare policy, but they also keep the left-wing voters who care about the Democratic Party actually spending money on their own interests. I don't think they ever challenge the likelihood of us being able to win enough key states that you get all of the benefits from having a Democrat in party. When you back your own fucking candidate, it's likely that we still win the Senate and the House. But why do you absolutely lose if you nominate a far-right candidate in the primary? The first thing they claim is just that you nominate the most crazy candidate that no one will ever like. The issue is Grace gives you excellent analysis that goes unresponded to with regards to why you need this candidate to win the primary first. If these people are as crazy as they claim, it is unclear that normal people believe the conspiracies enough to win the primary in the first place. That means it is likely a Trump candidate. Trump is fucking far right. The important thing is, though, he's pretty popular and his voice means something. The impact is Trump candidates get swing voters on board, but they also get the Republican Party. They say that swing voters don't like this. We give you a litany of reasons as to why swing voters are into Trump. The first is just that Trump won swing voters by talking about issues that appeal to them. The second was a 24-hour news cycle, always prioritizing people who said crazier things. Democrats almost never say things as crazy as they do. But the final thing is just like people aren't media literate. They don't understand that tax cuts come at the expense of the healthcare policy. People like having money. All of these reasons make Trump candidates really, really likable. The impact of this is the vote on the right increases. What happens on the left then? They just say that the left only wants to win, so they'll always have guaranteed votes. That's just fucking not true, right? The left is African-American voters who are victims of the racism that Trumpian candidates spew. They are principled people who care about democracy. People feel fucking betrayed if the party that they have given their life to is the party that is going out and funding people that spit all that vitriol about them. Those votes are needed in swing states. As Joe himself says, you can't lose a single vote if you're trying to win in a swing state. We make sure we keep all of those left-wing voters. But finally, assume at our worst that a centrist wins. I think it is far, far healthier to build a good relationship with a centrist Republican that gets into power and aim for bipartisanship. Grace gives you a lot of analysis as to why denigrating healthy centrism is really bad. It leads to far more extreme Republican Party, which also makes the left go extreme in turn. All of that means that people segregate into their own communities. They never feel willing to cross the aisle. It means that politics is always swinging back and forth. Maybe I am just a crazy lib that buys into Biden's dreams, but America could be a better place. I think we try and make it so.
Thank you very much for that speech. A big round of applause for all our grand finalists.
That's why my phone popped up. I should have done it.